What is going on, guys, and welcome to today's video. And in today's video I'm going to show you how to make these 3D printable parametric shelves using Fusion 360. With that said, let's get started. Okay guys, so before getting started with the actual project, I want to go over a quick couple of things about the actual file here, as well as setting up the parameters, how to make sure that everything is completely parametric, and then making sure you have overall success when it comes to making this project in Fusion 360. So here I have the actual file in front of your screen here, and I'm going to go ahead and open up my parameters section. So type in S on my keyboard, change parameters, and now we have all the parameters listed out for this actual project here. You can see we have a couple of parameters set here. We have a total of about 6. We have box height, box width, box depth, shelving distance, shelving amount, and shelf top. And these are all listed in inches units, except for one, which is the shelving amount, and I'll cover that more along the lines later on in the video as to how we can also set that up. But the main thing here is making sure that we have continuity or some sort of parametric features along with the file. So if we were to adjust the height here, you can see that the whole project here will adjust accordingly, making sure that the shelves here also stay in accordance to the top of the actual shelf. Same thing for the width. If you wanted to make this a little bit wider, changes to 4 inches, the actual file will actually become the actual body, including this little shelf here. This little shelf in the middle will actually change in size as well. So that's incredibly important in having that parametric feature, because everything in the actual project itself would change in accordance to what changes you made within the parametric timeline here. So additionally, there's one additional feature I wanted to show you guys, is the actual shelving amount, which is an important unit to have, or important thing to know here, is that since everything else in here is listed in inches, Fusion 360 doesn't really have a certain unit or some sort of expression to identify saying, hey, this is just a number. Like most of the items that you add in the parametric features, they have some sort of unit attached to it, and depending on what unit you use, that would be allocated to the amount or number or whatever it is you're using. But for this instance, in order to achieve the actual shelving amount in terms of just a number and not an actual unit or degree or anything like that, we're going to be using no units for that, and I'm going to show you more what I mean later on in the video. But those are just a few key things I wanted to show you guys and what we're going to accomplish here today. That way when we move forward with the actual creation of the project, everything will make sense, and everything will flow as easily as if you know how to make this from scratch. So let's go ahead and get started with the actual modeling process. Okay guys, so I've opened up a completely new canvas in Fusion 360 so we can get started with the actual creation of the design itself. So there's a couple of key things I want to let you guys know. First is that we need to set up the document settings, and the second one is setting up the parameters for our actual design for this project. So the first thing here, if you haven't done so already, within document settings, I'm going to be working with inches in this project. So make sure to go ahead and set that up for the units in the document settings section. The next thing we need to do is set up some parameters for the actual design. That way we're actually creating something with some sort of constraints or some sort of numerical amount. That way it makes the actual design process much easier. So I'm going to type in S on my keyboard, change parameters, and now we have this parameters box that has opened up. The next thing we need to do is add some user parameters. So select this button here, go ahead and type in box height. It's going to be 7.5 inches. Next thing is the box width. That's going to be 3 inches. Box depth, 3 inches. This shelf distance, 1.5 inches. The next thing is the amount, and we're going to select the unit for this one here to no units. The expression is going to be 3. Press OK. Last parameter we're going to set here, top underscore shelf. It's going to be 2.75 inches. Now within the parameters box, you should have a total of about 6 parameters here: the height, the width, the depth, the shelf distance, the amount of shelves, and the top shelf. And I'll go over a little bit more about what this is for later on in the video. After you have all of that set, press OK. Now we can actually get started with the actual sketching of the design. Okay, so let's go ahead and create a new sketch. So click on create sketch, select this plane here, reorient the canvas, and we can go ahead and get started with the sketching. From here, I'm gonna click on create, rectangle, 3-point rectangle, select the origin, and just bring this out. Now from here, we can actually set up some of the parameters that we've set within the parameters box. So from top to bottom, this is going to be box depth. Press tab, and this one's going to be box width, and press OK. Now we basically set up some constraints here, and these are basically the parameters that we set. So if we go ahead and change any of the change parameters in this dialog box here, anything that we change here will actually reflect accordingly with our sketch here, and that's incredibly important because we want to make sure this is completely parametric. The next thing we're going to do here is press E on our keyboard, select this sketch box underscore height, then press OK. Now we have just a basic box for our design. The next thing we need to do here is create a shell. In order to create those walls on the outer edges that we see here on our shelf here, we need to basically create these walls here. And in order to do that, we need to create a shell. So let's create a shell. Select this face here, select this top face, and I'm gonna set this to about 0.08 inches. Then press OK. Now you have basically the shell of the design, where it's kind of hollowed out from the inside, but we also have the overall skeleton of the design here. The next thing we can do here is we can let's go ahead and add a fillet just for design, just for kind of like a giving it a good aesthetic look. Bring this down to maybe a 0.75, then press OK. Now we basically have the rough skeleton of our design here. You can see pretty much everything but this top part here, this bottom piece here, the shelving, and the actual shelf itself. So let's go ahead and actually get started with actually creating the shelf on the actual design here. Now there's a couple of things to note, is that when it comes to creating something like those shelves here, we need to make sure that if we're going to create one here, that it reflects on the opposite side as well, and that if it reflects on the opposite side, if I make any changes, that everything else will change in accordance to what I set here. Meaning that if I create a shelf here and I change the dimensions here, it would also reflect on the other side. And as well as keeping the shelves proportional to the top. So meaning that if this changes in height, the shelving doesn't just stay static, it actually moves along with the height and according to whatever parameters that we set. It's much easier said than done, but of course, let me just show you guys what I mean. That way everything would make sense. So the first thing we need to do here is set a midplane. So press S on our keyboard, type in midplane, select this face here, this other face here, then press OK. Now we have basically a midplane where if this was cut right in the middle from here to here, this is the middle of everything. Now we can go ahead and get started with creating another sketch. So I'm gonna press create sketch, and then make sure that you're selecting this face right here, okay? Do not select this plane that we created. It's gonna be this face here. Reorient the model. Now we can go ahead and get started. From here, we're gonna create 4 lines. So 1, 2, 3, 4. Now we've created 4 lines. Let's go ahead and make sure that all of them are parallel. So I'm gonna select this parallel feature here. Select this line, this line, this line to this line. Just make sure that they're all parallel to each other. The next thing, we're gonna add another constraint. So press D on our keyboard. Select this little tiny button right here and select the very top one as well. Drag this out. This is going to be top shelf. Now what this essentially is doing is creating a constraint here, meaning that if this changes in height, this will change as well in accordance to whatever this number is. So, which is 2.75 inches, meaning that there's gonna be 2.75 inches of space from here to here. That's incredibly important because if we were to change the height, we wanna make sure the actual shelves change as well. The next thing we need to do here is add some more constraints. So I'm gonna select these 2 lines there. Let's set this to about 0.1. Select these 2 lines here. Select this to about 0.1, and then select these inner two lines here and make this maybe a 0.125. Now you should have a total of 4 lines here. All of them should be constrained. After that, create sketch, and now you should have 4 lines in total. Next, we're going to do here, press E on our keyboard, select this sketch here, select this sketch there, and then drag this out to the other side to about -1.5. Let's see, or -0.15. Let's see what that shows up. Looks good. So next thing here, we need to make sure to select operation to join, and maybe we can actually make this a little bit thicker. Now let's do 1.5. Looks good to me. Make sure to select join as your operation, and now you have basically the rough outline of our shelf here. The next thing we need to do here is mirror this to the other side. So press S on our keyboard, type in mirror. From here, make sure the object type is selected to features. The object is the actual extrusion that we selected or that we've made. Mirror plane. Select the construction that we just made, the construction plane that we just made. Press OK. Now you have the actual shelf here where this is completely constrained. So if we were to change any of the parameters, the other side will also reflect accordingly to those constraints and those parameters here. So for example, if we were to open up our parameters box, we go to, let's just say, top shelf. It changes to maybe 2.5. You can see that it moves upwards according to whatever expression we have here. What if we wanted this a little lower? 3 inches. Another major thing here is that since we have this fillet here, you don't want to create a gap that's too small. So let's just say we were to change this to 2, you'll actually see we'll have some issues here. So you can see there's no issues right now, but let's just say if we had this to like maybe 1, you know, now we have an issue where it's really not going to make sense to have a shelf showing up here. So make sure you have a reasonable distance from the top to the first shelf there. So let's just keep this to a 2.5 or a 2.75, whichever you prefer. And let's go back to creating our design. The next thing we do here is create a chamfer. So type in S on our keyboard, chamfer. From here, we're going to select these inner lines underneath the actual design. Now, you might be asking, why am I doing this? Well, let me just set up those chamfers first. Now, the reason why I'm doing this is because when it comes to 3D printing some sort of vertical object, you cannot just go from 3D printing something at going straight up 90 degrees and then having to print to the side 90 degrees. It's just going to be very difficult for most printers to do so. And ideally, it's a lot easier for a printer to print at an angle. So meaning that, just imagine when you're printing this, your printer is going up, 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 up. Then it starts printing at an angle, at an overhang that it can actually reasonably print. And most printers will have much more success printing at a chamfer than just printing at a 90-degree angle, which is basically this here, which is why we add the chamfer. We can actually create different ways instead of having a chamfer, but for this reason, for this case, using a chamfer would work best for this scenario. And I think it just makes it a lot easier in terms of the design process as well. Okay, so we're gonna go ahead and create our pattern on path. Press S on your keyboard, pattern on path. And what this allows us to do is to create a pattern on a path, basically. So some of the features I'm gonna select here, so make sure object type is selected to features. Select these 3 features that we just created. This is the extrude feature that we made on this shelf on the right-hand side. This is the mirror feature where we mirrored this onto the other side. And this is the chamfer for both of these as well. So make sure path, I'm going to select this little line at the very bottom, the very back. And then from here, we can go ahead and start inputting some of our parameters. So before I do that, I'm going to make sure to select distribution to spacing. And I'm also going to make sure to, actually, that's pretty much it. So let's go ahead and start adding it. So for amount or quantities, put amount. And for distance, it's going to be shelving distance. Then press OK. Now we have a basic overview of our shelving, meaning that this is reflected to the other side, and all of these are also constrained to each other, meaning that whatever the shelving distance is, which is 1.75, there's 1.75 of inches of space in between those, just about. So let's go ahead and add, let's just say if we wanted to make this a little bit longer, say 2 inches, we can absolutely do so. And we're pretty much done with the actual skeleton of the design. The last few things are just basically details. So the details meaning this very top piece here, making sure that it has this little chamfer part here and this little top lip here, and as well as this little box in here that we can actually put stuff underneath as well. Of course, you don't have to have those things, but ideally if you wanted to complete the look, let's go ahead and do so. So next thing we're gonna do here, create sketch, select this face here, and we'll go ahead and select a rectangle, select this edge here, drag this out to this edge here, and make sure it actually connects to this, and make sure you have this little X showing up. If not, you're gonna have issues when you're actually changing the parameters. So I'm gonna press OK. From here to here, we can make this maybe 0.2. You can drag this out to maybe about 1 inch. Join, S on our keyboard, change parameters, or chamfer. Select this line here, drag this out, bam. Now the reason why I add this is because, well, number one, it adds kind of like a feature or a design part or a good clean aesthetic look to it. But also the chamfer is also, so when it's printing upward, it also prints at an angle. That way there's no issues of just printing this lip there. So for example, if we were to not add the chamfer, you would probably need to have supports to support this, which is not what we'd want. Adding a chamfer simplifies that issue. So let's just double check and make sure that everything checks out. So change parameters. Let me make sure that if we were to change anything, everything acts in accordance to those changes. So let's see, box width, say if it's 4, okay, cool. Box height, let's just say maybe it's 9 inches. Great. See, now everything functions smoothly. What if we wanted to increase the distance? So maybe instead of a 2, it'd be a 3. Cool. What if we wanted to add, just say 5? We can absolutely do so. Now, of course, keep in mind, you cannot add an extraordinarily amount of, you cannot be expecting to add 5, but your box height is 9. It just doesn't make sense. So if you want to add more shelving, let's just say if you wanted to add like 7, well, then the shelving distance would probably have to be like 1 inch apart. And of course, that would not work. Maybe 0.5. That could work. It looks like it works there. Maybe instead of 1.5, it'd be a 2. And then there you go. Now you have a shelf, a completely parametric shelf. So you can have one here, you can have one in the middle, have one here, and have one at the bottom. Or if you want to have one of different sizes, so maybe you're gonna have a larger item sitting at the very top, so you add a shelf here, and then you have like a bunch of smaller shelves, so 1, 2, 3, and then just one here, so you can add larger items. So whatever you'd want to do with this design, of course, it's totally up to you. But let's go ahead and complete this look and finalize the design. So I'm gonna click create sketch, select this body here, or this, select that face there, 2-point rectangle, select this here, drag this out, make sure it snaps onto this part here. I'm gonna make sure to add a constraint from here to here, 0.1, press E on our keyboard, press that, drag this out to, let's just say 1 inch. I'm gonna make sure that's an actual join operation, press OK. Now you have the basic overall look of the design. The last thing is to add the actual shelf. Now this part, one quick and easy dirty way to make the shelf is by using the extrude command here. We're gonna select this face here, select extent type to object, and then select this little face you can see right here. Now you have the overall look of the shelf. Select operation to new body, and now we have a completely new body for this design, meaning that this is an entire body, it's on its own, and this little piece here is a body on its own, meaning that we'll have 2 bodies total within our browser. Now there's a couple of things I want to note about this, and for example, there's one thing called tolerances, meaning that if we were to print this and print this very likely would not print because of our tolerances of our printers. And depending on your printer, if you have a higher end printer, tolerances could be a little bit more tighter and you'll have no issues. But if your tolerances or your printer, you know, it's not exactly exact with its measurements or with its prints, then obviously tolerances would be an issue. So one quick thing we can do is create an offset, and we can create an offset of maybe 0.02 inches. And that what that does is that creates a small gap between the start all the way to the very end. Now the very end doesn't changes, but there's a small gap just enough. So that means if this were to print and this were to print, it would actually slide in and print just fine because there's enough gap for them to print. We can actually make this a little bit larger, offset of about 0.03 inches. I'd say a 0.03 should work just fine. Make sure your direction's selected to one side, to object. And the reason for to object is because if we were to change the dimensions or the parameters of everything of the actual design itself, the shelf should also change the actual size as well. And that's incredibly important because, of course, you know, what good does it make to have the whole design change, but not the actual shelf that holds the things to change as well. After that's done, press OK. And now we have basically the complete design. So let's make sure that everything works in accordance to each other. Change parameters. Let's say if we have shelf depth, let's just make sure the shelf changes too. Yep, as you can see here, this shelf changes as well. Let's go back. See box width. Let's make sure the shelf changes in width. Yep, looks good to me. That means this also changes as well. So looks good to me. 3 inches. What about the amount? Let's just say we wanted 5 and shelf distance. Actually, that looks pretty good to me. Okay. Now we have a total of 5 slots. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And we have the whole body here and the shelf. Now, the reason why I'm not creating or duplicating this body here is because if we were to duplicate it and have it along this path here, obviously if we're changing parameters and the more bodies we have, then Fusion 360 would have to compute all of those, which probably make it an issue. So there's really no need for us to duplicate this and make this along each shelf. We could absolutely do so, but there's no need unless you're like planning to render this or make this into a render or something like that where you want to show the final product. But more so, what ideally you should do is that once you send this off to print, you send this off as one body. Take this as well, import it into your slicer, just duplicate it within the slicer, and then pretty much should have no issues. So the last thing we should do is actually name this. So this should be our shelf, and this should be the shelf hinge, or maybe shelf piece, whatever that could be. So that's pretty much the entire design here. We're pretty much completed everything from start to finish, from the sketching process to the parameters to making the shell to setting a mid plane to creating the actual shelving slots, and then basically setting up the actual aesthetic look of the design. And if we wanted to, we can absolutely add some colors here. So press A on my keyboard, maybe make this red. Maybe this could be white, plastic white. Cool. Now we have the pretty much a completely final design for this. The next thing to do is import this to your slicer, and let's go ahead and do that, and let's see exactly what that looks like. Okay, so I went ahead and imported our final object into the slicer here, and as you can see, everything should print just fine and smooth. Now, the main thing here, for example, for the shelf, like I mentioned earlier, you can actually take this shelf here, clone it, duplicate it, whatever, depending on whatever slicer you're using, and just lay it out across the actual build plate here. So, setting everything up, everything looks good to me. You can see that if we were to slice the plate, that everything checks out. You can see that there is no supports here. So if we were to toggle on supports, let's see if it needs it. Nope, doesn't need any supports here. You can see that there is pretty much everything is set, easy. Everything checks out. Let me make sure everything looks good. So this is pretty much the final design that we've made in Fusion 360. Of course, you can probably add some tweaks to this, as I'm getting about a 5-hour print time on my Bamboo Labs. Probably something we could also do is change the actual shell. So maybe the inside thickness, let's say to about 0.6 inches. And maybe if we can remove this one, change it. So the shell, this should decrease maybe about an hour of time. This in here. Oh no, well, it does decrease the amount of filament we're using, but overall, I think it's pretty good design. It was fairly easy parametric shelf to make, but more so, send this off to print. Let me know what you guys think. Let me know your guys' thoughts, comments, and opinions down below if you have any questions, of course. So with that said, I look forward to seeing you guys' prints.